Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Islamophobia Watch podcast. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about what India is dealing with as far as jihad and Islamization efforts in India by Muslims. This is a big story that doesn't get reported, of course, in the West. And when it gets reported, probably gets most of the time manipulated by the pro-jihadist narrative. Furthermore, I haven't had the time to really look into this and investigate it, but I do want to do so. I want to dig deeper into it. In fact, India represents probably one of the most shocking and grotesque stories of Islamic jihad and genocide that the world has ever witnessed. When I first learned about this, probably about a decade ago, more like 15 years ago, I was shocked because I knew already some of the numbers pertaining to slavery and some of the numbers just globally. But when you get into studying the record of the victims of jihad as far as globally and throughout history, it's a difficult territory because scholarship has not been settled. This has been a relatively new discipline, and the reason it's difficult for scholars to come up with estimates and numbers and solid studies and research is because every time someone attempts to gauge the situation and someone attempts to get a reporting or research going along those lines, anything that's critical to Islam, anything that's going to expose Islam and its true history of jihad, people like that get targeted and taken down. One example is the Dutch professor Patricia Kroner, who had to flee her native Denmark. And I can't remember now. I think she lived in the UK for a period of time and then on to the United States. But anyways, it's because she was one of the first Western historians that exposed the fallacies of the Quran and the Islamic narrative, the fact that there is a lot of inconsistencies. I mean, she basically introduced what the Bible has been hammered for close to 200 years or more than 200 years, depending on how you look at it, with what they call biblical criticism, and you've had people taking apart the Bible, and no one's gotten killed over that, right? Christians may not like it. We may find it disingenuous, and we may find many times these so-called biblical scholars who are liberal and want to take down the Bible, their whole research comes out as bogus, right? But all this is settled in the halls of academia, and no one's gotten killed. No one's gotten threats over criticizing the Bible or coming up with their own research that proves whatever. That's how things are worked out in a civilized society, right? Well, that doesn't work for Muslims. Every time a scholar attempts to expose Islam and to bring up to the surface the stories, whether it's from the past, as far as the actual history of Islam and the history of jihad, because the history of Islam is the history of jihad. Islam would have never succeeded based on just preaching. Muhammad never succeeded. Over the course of, 10 years or so, he barely gained 1,000 followers. Over the course of only a short period of time, when he picked up the sword and became a violent terrorist warlord, he increased his following tremendously because men are driven by greed and violence and lust. And so they found such a leader, and that's not anything new, except he fused his conquest with pseudo-religion, with all sorts of made-up fables. If he ever existed, because that's the other big question, did he ever exist? And did Mecca ever exist? Professor Patricia Kroner, for example, presents the evidence that Mecca probably did not exist. And there's compelling evidence to look into that. Robert Spencer has presented evidence that Muhammad probably was a legendary, is probably a non-existent person, rather. He probably is just the sum up of Muslim narratives and legendary figure that never really existed. A legend, a fable. Imagine how many people have been killed in the name of a made-up historic figure. It's truly tragic. Back to India. What's going on in India is tragic. Number one, because the true history of the genocide that was perpetrated on India is unknown. The invasion of India began in the early 8th century, right around the time when the Moors attacked and began their conquest of the Iberian Peninsula. In fact, some will say that it was the exact same year, 711, is when AD is when the Moors attacked Spain and officially the conquest of India began. Some people give earlier dates. So it's kind of difficult to nail it down, but it goes on for a long time. It goes on for hundreds of years. And in fact, in a way, it continues until today. So that's a long time. What the world does not know, and what the world has never been told and doesn't want to hear, is absolutely the horrendous genocide that India has been subjected to by the Muslim jihadist armies. A genocide that some would say is in the 400 million murdered mark. Other people would say all the way up to 600 million. And if that's true, and I believe it's true, and we need to do a better job in making this known. It doesn't matter what the price is to pay. There will be a price to pay to do this. But we have Holocaust deniers who are absolutely happy, will just shamelessly looking into your face, and they'll begin to tell you how Holocaust never existed. It's just all bogus. It's all made up, shamelessly. These are pathological liars who will do that, and they've spent hours and hours getting brainwashed by propagandists who shamelessly twist history and present a revised version to where now the victims are the actual villains, right? Because they've come up now with this story, right? And that's what jihad does. That's what the jihadis do. They'll look you in the eye. They'll look you straight up in the eye, and they'll lie to you, and they'll tell you that never happened, and they'll actually go on to tell you how the Muslims are the victims. And this is what's going on in the media today. They spin the victim narrative shamelessly in the media to this day. And, as you know, victims are allowed anything. So that's how it works. No matter how powerful they are, no matter how much majority they have, no matter how, they're not majority in India, so they play this victim card, right? But really what they're doing is they're advancing jihad. And that's the formula. It works flawlessly in India. It works flawlessly everywhere, right? Muslims are certainly the majority in Saudi Arabia, but they're not celebrating that. They're not going around celebrating how they're a majority in Saudi Arabia and so many other majority Muslim countries. They're not going around publicly saying, hey, look at us. We're the majority. We'll run this place, right? They will play the victim, even if they're the majority. And that's what they do. So what we've started doing now recently is we've started tracking the word jihad, and we're generating an automated search based on the word jihad, just to track what's coming up on the internet. And this search, automated search, is pulling stories from all kinds of publications, a lot of them coming from India and Southeast Asia. And you can see clearly the two sides of the issue. You can see the Muslim propaganda, jihadist propaganda. You can see how they lie. You can see how they come up with all sorts of fake stories, and this whole victim thing is just on autopilot. It just it writes itself. I mean, that's how they've perfected the art of propaganda to a point where, the stories write themselves. That's how they operate. And that's the only way for them to keep people in bondage and confusion, and to continue to destroy whole countries and cultures. So check out our Telegram channel, and a lot of the stories that you'll see that are coming up, they are only showing up in our feed because it's an automated search. So you need to use your own discretion. You need to realize that, these stories, we don't publish these stories to promote jihad. We publish these stories because we want people to know and to see what's on the internet when you perform that search continuously, on an ongoing basis. And I don't want to overwhelm people, but if you follow Islamophobia, actually, the word Islamophobia, the internet content around that term is 10 times more than jihad. 10 times more, if not more. Honestly, it's like an unceasing pipeline that keeps generating all sorts of unimaginable, crazy stories. You just shake your head, and I get these updates on a daily basis. It's unbelievable what governments are doing around the world. All sorts of parasitic NGOs are doing. They are squeezing this thing. They're milking this Islamophobia false narrative like there's no tomorrow. That's the world we're living in. It's kind of like the pandemic type deal. The globalists are milking this thing like there's no tomorrow. The same thing with the jihadis. They found this mecca of propaganda now. The perfect label that psychologically disarms the opponents and simultaneously casts the Muslims as victims, puts them in the defensive, and gives them the permission to be on the offensive. You just killed 3 birds with one stone. And when you call someone an Islamophobe, you immediately disarm them because they're now morally inferior. You are now the victim. The Muslims are the victim. And also, the victim gets the permission to do or say whatever they want so they can protect themselves, because that's how this thing works. It's all psyop. It's one gigantic psyop that was launched about 20 years ago. And we'll have to deal with it. No one's coming to save us. We'll have to figure this out on our own. I'm doing my humble part. If you like my efforts, like this podcast, and share it with your friends. Check out our website and sign up for our free newsletter. We haven't even started.